If wealth were a staircase, which step are you standing on, and why haven't you moved? This is not just about income. This is about consciousness. There are 7 invisible levels of wealth, each bound not by the world around you, but by the world within you. Let's break the illusion. You're not stuck financially. You're just stuck mentally. Let's find out where and rise. I recall the time I stood in a friend's apartment, broke in the physical sense, but richer than I had ever been spiritually. I was down to my last few dollars, no job, no future, but I had discovered something powerful. The levels of wealth were not outer conditions. They were internal stations of awareness. I decided that night I would not stay on the floor. I imagined myself wealthy. I saw myself free. I climbed the stairs of consciousness without moving an inch in the world, and within months, everything around me changed. Not because I worked harder, but because I thought differently. Everything begins with wealth consciousness, and unless you shift internally, no outer financial gain can last. You don't attract wealth, you awaken it. The first level is survival. This is the realm of the deeply stuck, where you believe money is always lacking, always running out. Your days are filled with worry, but it's not money you lack. It's a sense of worth. Until you believe you deserve security, you'll stay here, no matter your income. The second level is stability. Here the person has enough to get by, but they live in fear of losing it. They save, yes, but not from abundance, from panic. They have not escaped scarcity, they've only masked it with temporary calm. The third level is comfort. This is deceptive. You begin to enjoy a decent life, but you dare not stretch too far. You begin to believe that more is dangerous, that wealth is immoral. You compare instead of expand. This is where subconscious wealth programming holds you hostage. The fourth level is growth. You begin to see possibilities. You start asking bigger questions. How can I increase, not maintain? Your money mindset begins to shift. You invest, you create. You start seeing money as energy, not as a threat. But beware, the old fears still whisper. The fifth level is freedom. Now you are in command of your choices. Your income may fluctuate, but your inner state does not. You understand emotional blocks to money are illusions. You take bold action from inner security. You no longer beg reality to change. You know it obeys your assumption. The sixth level is impact. Here, wealth becomes a vehicle. You are no longer just free, you make others free. You channel your wealth for purpose. You now know that prosperity blueprint was always hidden within you. It awakens in service. The seventh level is legacy. This is where time dissolves. Your wealth outlives you. You become an idea. You are no longer a man or woman with money. You are a movement, a vibration encoded into generations. This level cannot be forced. It is walked into naturally through energetic alignment with wealth. Ask yourself, not where you are financially, but where you are vibrationally. That is the true staircase. And the only step you ever need to take is the one inward. Everything begins with the assumption of being. No one can escape the reality of their self-concept, and that includes the realm of wealth. The first level, survival, is not about lack of money. It is the absence of identity in abundance. At this level, a man or woman walks through the world clothed in fear. They do not wake up and think of wealth. They wake up and think of how to get through another day without drowning. Their thoughts do not ascend. They circle around the same pit: rent, food, bills, loss. But what they do not see is that it is not the world placing them here. It is themselves. You cannot rise above what you are unwilling to assume. When a man assumes lack, when he embodies the identity of the poor, the world reflects that identity with mechanical precision. The outer world is not cruel, it is obedient. It cannot defy the orders given by the inner man. The one who lives at the level of survival believes that money is always running away, that life is against him. that abundance belongs to others. These are not facts. They are mental pictures. And every picture becomes a pattern. The person stuck at survival wakes up to defend their limitation, not knowing they are its author. There is always enough in the world. The earth is full, the sky is full. Only the inner landscape can be barren. When I first discovered this, I was shaken. Could it be that I had suffered because I assumed suffering? Could it be that my emptiness was merely a mirror of what I refused to feel as already mine? I had believed I was a victim of a cruel fate, but I came to learn that fate was simply imagination misused. To escape the survival level, one must not earn more, but assume differently. If a man earns thousands, but sees himself as poor, he will return to zero eventually. But if a man earns nothing and assumes he is supported, provided for, and guided by unseen supply, he will begin to rise. Not because the world changed, but because he did. You must dare to see yourself as one who has, even if the bank account denies it, even if your environment laughs, even if your family history screams against it. The moment you assume abundance within, you create a crack in the shell, and that crack becomes the door. I remember vividly a time when I had nothing but debt. I walked the streets with no destination but the inner world. I would enter a quiet place, close my eyes, and feel myself stepping into a home I didn't own, receiving letters I hadn't yet written, enjoying conversations about business I didn't yet have. I did not beg the outer world to bring me evidence. I brought evidence to myself within. And slowly, like the tide turning, the world began to yield, not because I forced it, but because I had stopped resisting what was already mine in spirit. Survival consciousness makes one a slave to the visible. It tells you to wait for a paycheck, to wait for approval, to wait for economy or government to shift. But the true power is in imagination. You must decide not to wait. The moment you see yourself differently, even in silence and stillness, you begin to move up. Movement in consciousness is real movement. The one who remains stuck simply has not moved internally. They have rehearsed the same thoughts, the same fears, the same hopeless stories for years. And the world, in loyalty, has mirrored those rehearsals. To break free, begin with small inner acts. Imagine receiving a gift. Feel the excitement of unexpected provision. Hear a friend call you lucky. These are not fantasies, they are blueprints. As you persist, the world must follow. The laws of reality are rooted in assumption. There is no exception to this. What you are within, you will be without. So if you are stuck in survival, do not seek another job. Seek a new self-image. Let the old man die, the one who waited, begged, and feared. Assume the identity of one who is safe, who is seen, who is surrounded by invisible wealth. The person in survival may say, but I have no proof. And I say that is precisely your freedom, because if you had proof, it would no longer be faith, it would be fact. And fact is the final shadow, not the origin. Begin now to walk by inner certainty. Build your inner kingdom as if it were finished. Refuse to speak the language of fear. Let the poor man die within, and you will see riches gather at your feet without. For as you believe, so shall it be done unto you. Not as the world commands, but as your heart allows. The man who escapes survival often believes he is free. He breathes a little easier. He pays his bills on time, and he may even have something left over at the end of the month. But make no mistake, he has not yet arrived at freedom. He has simply changed the shape of fear. The one who lives at the level of stability is often more deeply imprisoned than the one in survival, for now he believes he has something to lose. And what he possesses externally, he clutches internally. His wealth is no longer about lack. It becomes about the fear of its loss. This level of consciousness is subtle. It pretends to be wise. It speaks the language of caution. It urges savings, warns against risk, and worships security. But beneath its mask is anxiety. The individual in this state does not operate from trust in infinite supply. He functions from the assumption that gain is temporary, that life is unpredictable, and that the only protection is hoarding. He does not grow wealth, he guards it. He does not flow with abundance, he dams it up in fear. I once met a man who owned several properties, had investments across cities, and never lacked comfort. Yet he confessed to me that he could not sleep. He feared the collapse of markets. He watched the news as if it were scripture. Every phone call became a possible emergency. He had achieved what many would call success, but internally he remained a beggar, haunted not by what he didn't have, but by the terror of losing what he did. He did not know he had merely changed levels without changing beliefs. Wealth consciousness is not measured by assets. It is measured by inner stillness. If your heart skips at the thought of bills, if your mind trembles at the idea of change, you are still not free. The level of stability is where many plateau. They have escaped visible poverty, but they have not yet entered invisible abundance. They walk a tightrope, forever looking down, praying they don't fall. But you are not meant to live by calculation. You are meant to live by assumption. The man who assumes he is always supported does not panic when the tide shifts, because he understands that the sea does not take, it carries. The emotional blocks to money often become visible at this level. In survival, you are too busy running to notice them. But in stability, the shadows come closer. You begin to hear the voices of your upbringing. Perhaps you were told not to ask for too much, not to be greedy, not to trust others with your wealth. And now, though you have enough, you struggle to feel safe. You avoid generosity out of fear. You reject opportunity out of caution. You do not lack means, you lack ease. And without ease, wealth is heavy. It becomes a burden, not a blessing. This is why many self-sabotage. They are given a taste of stability, but the inner self-picture still carries the stamp of lack, and the subconscious is a loyal servant. If it has been taught that wealth brings danger, it will not allow you to keep it. You may lose your job, sabotage your investments, or attract chaos, not because life is unfair, but because the inner thermostat is set to survival, and survival cannot tolerate surplus. To rise above this level, you must change your emotional posture toward wealth. You must start bracing yourself for loss. Begin to associate abundance with peace, not pressure. Feel yourself relaxed in prosperity, not anxious. Imagine yourself spending without guilt, receiving without suspicion, growing without fear. Let wealth become a rhythm, not a race. Know that financial stability is not a ceiling. It is only a floor. And the floor does not define your height. There was a time when I too hovered in this state. I had begun to earn more. My rent was paid. I had clothes and food, but I noticed something disturbing. I still panicked over small expenses. A surprise bill could ruin my entire week. I could not enjoy my income. I would check my balance constantly. I realized I had not yet become the man who was wealthy. I was simply the same man with more money. And so I began to revise, not my job, but my inner self. Every night, I would sit quietly and imagine that I felt peace around money. I didn't imagine more money. I imagined less fear. I felt myself smiling as I paid. I saw myself laughing when unexpected expenses came. I walked into stores and felt deserving. Even if I bought nothing, I refused to rehearse fear. And something changed, not just in my outer finances, but in my inner chemistry. Money became light, spending became joy, receiving became natural, and the more I relaxed, the more flowed in. The trap of stability is pretending it's the end, but it is only a checkpoint. It is the universe asking you, can you hold this and stay calm? If you can, you are ready to rise, but if not, you will loop here, safe, but not sovereign. The world will offer you many justifications for playing small. The economy, inflation, politics, inheritance, but none of these matter. What matters is your self-concept. What matters is the vibration you return to when no one is watching. And the man who trusts that wealth is natural, who assumes supply flows without end, who sees money as the servant of vision and not its master, that man, even if he loses everything, will rise again. There exists a more dangerous state than survival or even instability, and it is the state called comfort. For in survival, a man knows he is in pain. In instability, he is aware that fear is his master. But in comfort, he sleeps. And while asleep, he believes he has arrived. Comfort is not wealth. Comfort is a pause. It is a hole, dressed up like a home. It tricks the man into stopping his transformation. He looks around and says, "This is good enough," not realizing that good enough is the coffin of greatness. He eats regularly, his car runs, his clothes fit, he may even vacation. But within him lives a fear he dare not speak, the fear of wanting more. The one who lives in comfort has made a quiet deal with the world. He has traded growth for predictability. He has exchanged vision for routine. He tells himself stories like, "This is just how life is," or "I don't need much to be happy." And these statements, while soothing, are often symptoms of hidden resignation. The comfort zone is lined with the beliefs of our caretakers, our early teachers, our societal scripts. They inherit their ceiling and call it contentment. But the soul was not born to coast. It was born to climb. What keeps many trapped in comfort is not lack of ability, but an inherited guilt around abundance. They have been taught that wanting more is selfish, that dreaming big is foolish, that reaching higher is dangerous, and so they lower their expectations to match what others find acceptable. They suppress their inner expansion so they can belong. But consciousness does not negotiate. If it was meant to expand and you resist, it will turn inward and fester. You will find yourself anxious without reason, restless in the midst of stability. That is not dissatisfaction. It is your higher self knocking. This level of wealth brings many subtle traps. At this level, a man will spend hours comparing himself to others, never to feel inspired, but to feel justified. "I have more than them," he says. "I must be doing well." And so he anchors his self-worth to others' limitations. But when you measure your expansion by how little others have grown, you shrink. The only true comparison is between your current state and your imagined potential. Have you become what you once desired? If not, then you are not done. Many confuse safety with stagnation. They say, "At least I'm not broke," not realizing they are still imprisoned. Only the chains are gold-plated. They have just enough not to suffer, but never enough to soar. They decline opportunities that stretch them. They say no to challenges that require them to grow. They build routines that numb their curiosity, and slowly they forget they are creators. They become managers of reality instead of authors of it. They spend more time preserving what is than imagining what could be. I remember meeting a woman who had a respectable career, a lovely and traveled once or twice a year. She smiled often, but it was the smile of someone who had silenced herself. When I asked her if she was happy, she hesitated. "I'm comfortable," she said. And I could see the fear behind her eyes. Fear that if she reached beyond this shell, she might lose it all. But I reminded her, anything you fear losing owns you. And the moment you are afraid to want more, you become less. To rise beyond comfort, one must confront the false belief that growth threatens peace. That is an illusion. True peace comes not from stillness, but from alignment. If your vision expands and you stay still, you are not in peace. You are in conflict. The desire for more is not greed. It is your soul's signature. It is your divine urge to express, to stretch, to become. And to suppress that is to deny your nature. In my own life, I once reached a phase where all seemed well. I had a flow of income. I had recognition. I had ease. But inside, I grew uneasy. I found myself dreaming bigger, seeing images of greater impact, larger audiences, more profound messages. At first I ignored them. Why disturb what is working, I thought. But the visions grew louder. The whispers became shouts, and I knew I was meant to rise again. So I began to imagine not more money, but more service. Not just more comfort, but more contribution. And in that shift, the comfort zone cracked. What came next was terrifying and magnificent. Comfort should never become a destination. It is a resting point, a moment to breathe, but the spirit must always move. And when you feel the first tremors of dissatisfaction in your comfort, honor them. They are not signs of ingratitude. They are invitations. The next level of wealth does not begin with effort. It begins with permission. Permission to dream again. Permission to reach. Permission to become. The great deception of the comfort level is that it convinces you that you must choose between peace and prosperity. But in truth, you are made for both. They are not enemies. They are partners. But you must lead with imagination, not fear. Do not let the memory of struggle convince you to settle. Let the vision of who you are becoming pull you forward. And when the world asks why you would want more, answer not with words, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows. There is no virtue in playing small. There comes a point in the journey of wealth where the soul, no longer content with survival, stability, or mere comfort, begins to stretch. This is the threshold of growth. It is the first level where the individual no longer reacts to life but begins to author it. Something stirs within. The person who once feared change now seeks it. The one who clung to the known begins to feel excitement for the unknown. The eyes that once looked outward for instruction begin to turn inward for guidance. This is the turning point. When a man or woman stops asking, "How do I survive?" and starts asking, "Who can I become?" At the level of growth, wealth is no longer seen as an accident or a privilege reserved for the few. It becomes a result, a vibration, a pattern. The individual begins to see beyond cause and effect. They observe how thought precedes action, how belief shapes opportunity, how internal certainty bends external events. They notice the link between their self-concept and their bank account, their assumptions and their result. This is not philosophy. It becomes experience. They no longer see their financial state as random. They begin to trace the invisible thread between who they are within and what they own without. This is when the desire to grow financially becomes holy. It is no longer about having more things, but about becoming more aware. You begin to read, not to escape, but to expand. You listen, not to be entertained, but to be transformed. Your conversations shift. You are no longer interested in gossip or complaints. You seek alignment, vision, elevation. You find yourself imagining beyond your upbringing. You stop asking what you can afford and start asking what you can imagine. You realize that the veil of the material world begins to thin. You realize that money is not a thing. It is a signal. It responds to the frequency you hold. When you operate from lack, even effort produces little. But when you operate from abundance, small actions create miracles. You become aware of your financial vibration. You begin to see your environment as feedback. If the world around you feels limited, you no longer blame the world. You inquire within. What thought am I repeating? What identity have I accepted? In this state, you begin to reprogram your money beliefs. You become a gardener of the mind. You notice the weeds, those old voices that say you're not worthy, you'll never have enough, people like you don't get rich. But instead of obeying them, you begin to question them. You ask, who told me this? Why did I accept it? And most importantly, what would happen if I believed the opposite? That one question can dissolve decades of limitation. I remember when I stood at this level, I had left behind fear and tasted some comfort, but it began to feel called higher. I had an image of myself speaking to crowds, writing with clarity, moving with confidence. Yet part of me still whispered, but what if it doesn't work? For a moment I hesitated. I returned to old habits, but then I did something simple. I imagined myself already there. I did not wait for evidence. I supplied it internally. I rehearsed success in the silence of my room. I walked and taught from the end. And slowly, the outer world complied. This is the secret of growth. You do not grow by effort alone. You grow by identity. You must become the person who belongs at the next level before the next level reveals itself. If you want to earn more, you must assume the self-image of the one who handles wealth with ease. If you want to serve more, you must imagine yourself already valuable. The body follows the mind. The world follows the man. At this level, your old fears return, sometimes louder. Not because they are stronger, but because your light is brighter. You must not be alarmed. Resistance is proof of expansion. The world will test your new assumption. You will ask, "Are you sure?" And you must answer, not with noise, but with stillness. You persist in the inner vision. You act as if the state you want is already yours. Not pretending, but assuming. An assumption is the bridge. The most beautiful part of this level is that money begins to come in new ways. You may be led to an idea, a person, an opportunity, but it always begins within. The man of growth walks into situations already knowing he is favored. He moves not to convince, but to express. He does not ask the world for permission. He brings permission with him. He carries the energetic signature of wealth, and that energy rearranges conditions to match. You will know you are in growth not because you have more, but because you desire more without shame. You feel your own expansion. You crave clarity. You seek freedom, not security. You create not to survive, but to serve. You rise not to prove, but to become. And every day the new self becomes more natural. The old self fades, not by force, but by disuse. At this level, you don't chase wealth. You awaken to it. You walk differently. You speak differently. You think in terms of vision, not in terms of problems. You ask what's possible more than what's wrong. And that shift, that subtle but profound shift, is the difference between a life of reaction and a life of creation. Freedom is not the result of money. It is the result of assumption. A man becomes free not when his circumstances change, but when his awareness does. The world will tell you that freedom comes from income, from independence, from ownership, but those are merely shadows. True freedom arises the moment you no longer consult the outer world for permission to feel wealthy, to feel secure, or to feel at peace. This level is not about how much you have. It is about how little you fear. The one who reaches this level of wealth has crossed a silent threshold. He no longer thinks about money as a thing to chase. He begins to see it as something natural, like breath, like light, like thought. It flows to him, not because he works harder, but because he works from a different center. He no longer fears interruption, change, or loss. He has learned that what is within him is the source, and what is around him is the echo. Freedom is the first level where the chains of the subconscious begin to loosen. The old patterns of guilt, scarcity, and doubt still whisper, but they no longer control. The man at this level does not beg the world to validate his value. He assumes it. He knows that worth is not earned, it is assumed, and the world reflects it in perfect correspondence. The salary, the clients, the contracts, the growth, they all follow the one who knows, I am free. In my own experience, I remember the shift as something so subtle it felt invisible. I did not wake up richer. I did not receive some vast inheritance, but I noticed my state of being had changed. I no longer waited for things to happen. I moved as if they already had. I walked through doors that had not yet opened. I smiled at results that had not yet come. And when people asked me why I was so certain, I could not explain. I just knew. And that knowing became the field in which reality began to rearray. The one who lives in freedom no longer views wealth as an emergency. He does not panic when bills arrive. He does not lose sleep over fluctuations because he knows that wealth is not in the form. It is in the consciousness that generates form. And because he has assumed himself to be one with supply, the world takes on a gentler rhythm. Money flows in and money flows out. But the identity remains rooted. This man is no longer a puppet of economy, circumstance, or approval. He is led by an inner light. At this level, opportunities begin to appear effortlessly, not because the universe suddenly favors you, but because you have become favorable. You no longer think small. You no longer hesitate. You no longer disqualify yourself from abundance. Instead, you step forward and the stage appears. The relationships that once eluded you begin to form. The invitations you thought were out of reach begin to arrive. But none of this surprises you because in your inner world you had already accepted it as natural. To live in freedom is to live in deep trust. Not trust in others, not trust in systems, but trust in your own power of assumption. You do not need to see the staircase. You walk as if it's already there. You speak from the end, not toward it. You declare yourself rich, not as hope, but as fact. And because assumption is the only law that governs reality, the world conforms not out of mercy, but out of design. Most people misunderstand freedom. They think it means never working again or never needing anyone. But true freedom means choosing. It means you work not to survive, but to express. It means you engage with life not from fear, but from fullness. You give because you are full, not because you're trying to earn. You move because you are led, not because you are pushed. This level of wealth feels like breath. It becomes effortless, rhythmic, natural. You no longer hold on to anything tightly because you know that what you are cannot be taken and what you are not cannot be kept. Freedom is also the level where giving becomes instinctive. You are no longer threatened by generosity. You do not ask, what will I lose? You know that every gift affirms your supply. You give not out of obligation, but out of identity. You are the wealthy one, and wealth flows where it is welcomed. You understand that you do not create wealth by saving alone. You create wealth by circulating consciousness. When you feel rich, everything you touch increases. You walk into rooms and people feel possibility. You speak and doors open, not because you forced them, but because you became the one who belongs beyond them. I once met a man who told me he finally felt free, not when he made his first million, but when he no longer cared about losing it. That moment, he said, was the moment he felt eternal. I understood what he meant. To feel free in wealth is to no longer be a hostage to form. You can have much or little, but you are always full. And from that fullness, you create again and again. When you reach the freedom level, you are no longer working your way toward abundance, you are walking from it. Your assumption is fixed. Your inner conversations are aligned. Your mental images are rich. And as you continue to assume freedom, more is given, not as reward, but as reflection. The world does not give you wealth. It mirrors the wealth you have accepted within. That is the truth of this level. You are not free because the world changed. You are free because you stopped asking it to. There comes a moment on the wealth journey when a man's vision stretches far beyond himself. He is no longer obsessed with what he can gain, for he has already tasted freedom. He begins to ask a new question, not what can I have, but what can I give? This is the level of impact, and while it is often praised by the world, its true foundation is spiritual. For one cannot truly impact others until he has first mastered the art of impacting himself. You can only give from the state you dwell in. You can only teach what you embody. And you can only lift others to a level you've walked through in imagination. The man at this level no longer works for validation. He has moved past the need to be seen as successful. He knows who he is. He has assumed his value so completely that his outer world constantly reflects it, not in applause alone, but in influence. People are drawn to him not because of charisma, but because of clarity. He does not chase, he attracts. He does not pursue, he radiates. And what radiates from him is the vibration of purpose. At the level of impact, you become a channel. Wealth begins to flow through you, not only to build your world, but to shape the worlds of others. You no longer hoard, you no longer calculate every gift. You understand that true abundance increases through circulation. You begin to see that you are not the source of wealth, you are its steward. And the more open your heart, the more freely the wealth flows. This is the paradox that eludes many. The more you give without fear, the more you receive without asking. This is not about philanthropy in the traditional sense. It is deeper than tax write-offs and public praise. Impact is about the quiet power of alignment. When your inner state is so settled in abundance that others feel freer just by being near you, you have stepped into divine wealth. You write, and lives change. You speak and minds awaken. You build and generations benefit. Not because you are extraordinary, but because you are available. Available to imagination, available to flow, available to be used for something greater than accumulation. I remember walking through a city where once I had struggled. I had known those streets in hunger, in doubt, in fear, and yet there I stood. Different not because the city had changed, but because I had. And as I walked, I saw people I once envied now asking me for guidance. I realized then impact is not measured by crowd size or income, it is measured by frequency. The world responds to your energetic signature. When you dwell in a state of wealth and peace, everything you touch bears fruit. This level also exposes the final remnants of the ego. For as your influence expands, the temptation to identify with outcomes will surface. You may begin to think the wealth is you, that the praise belongs to you. But you must remember, everything that flows through you is sourced from the invisible. You are not the light, you are the lamp. And the moment you forget this, the flow begins to restrict. Impact requires humility not as a virtue, but as a principle of expansion. You cannot hold more if your identity is fixed. You must remain fluid, ever open, ever becoming. At the level of impact, your prosperity blueprint evolves. You no longer plan from need, you plan from vision. You do not ask, what can I afford to build? You ask, what am I called to build? You no longer seek approval, you give it. You no longer ask permission, you create space. Your wealth becomes a canvas, not a cage. And in using it to serve something beyond self, you tap into wealth beyond measure. There is a sacred joy at this level, the joy of seeing others rise, the joy of watching an idea take form and bless thousands, the joy of realizing that your imagination did not just feed you, it fed your world. You start to see how one assumption can echo through cities, how one inner decision can lift entire communities. This is the realm of legacy in motion. You are not remembered because you existed. You are remembered because you expressed. To remain at this level, you must continue to assume larger identities. You must not settle in your current expression. Impact is not a destination, it is a rhythm, and it demands constant renewal of self. You must stretch your vision beyond convenience, beyond recognition. You must be willing to be misunderstood. You must move even when the world says, enough. Because the true measure of impact is not what others think of you. It is how deeply your inner world continues to evolve. When you live here, wealth no longer excites you. The mission does. The message does. The transformation you ignite does. Money becomes a tool, never the point. And because of that, it flows even more abundantly, not because you grasp, but because you give. And in giving, you become the expression of divine circulation. You are no longer a person with wealth. You are the embodiment of its meaning, and everything you touch multiplies. Legacy is not what you leave behind when you die. Legacy is what you begin building the moment your imagination becomes more real to you than the facts of your present life. There is a level of wealth so rare, so still, that few recognize it when they touch it. It does not scream in numbers or shout through possessions. It whispers through impact, echoes through generations, and dwells beyond time. This is the legacy level, where your wealth is no longer tied to your needs, but becomes a spiritual imprint on the world itself. It is here that you become an idea, an archetype, a living seed planted in the soil of eternity. At this level, your self-concept stretches beyond the boundaries of life as you know it. You begin to imagine not just your own transformation, but the transformation of those who will never meet you, yet will feel you. You begin to ask new questions. What am I building that will outlast me? Who am I becoming that the unborn may benefit from my becoming? These questions are not fueled by ego, but by revelation. You realize that consciousness is the only inheritance worth leaving behind. That money without meaning perishes, but meaning backed by wealth transcends the grave. The legacy level is invisible to those who are trapped in the material alone. For this is not about what you pass down. It is about what you embed. The man who lives here is less concerned with assets and more attuned to energy. He knows that wealth is not simply given, it is transferred through vibration, through the spirit of his words, through the depth of his decisions, through the richness of his presence. He carries himself as though his very existence is a teaching, not because he seeks followers, but because he cannot deny the frequency of who he is. In my own journey, there came a moment where I stopped imagining for outcomes and began imagining for essence. I no longer visualized things. I visualized movements. I stopped asking for personal breakthroughs and began assuming collective awakenings. I saw entire groups of people set free, families transformed, young minds lifted from mental bondage. And in doing so, I noticed something peculiar. My personal life improved more rapidly than ever before, because I was no longer imagining as an individual, I was imagining as a legacy. When you enter this level, the world becomes less about accumulation and more about architecture. You begin to design with time in mind, not time as a limit, but time as a partner. You say to yourself, what I do today, if done in the consciousness of truth, can ripple into decades. You begin to craft systems, structures, ideas and identities that will remain intact long after your physical presence fades, and yet none of it feels heavy. Because when you are moved by vision instead of pressure, you don't burn out, you burn brighter. Legacy is not forced, it is assumed. And the one who assumes it does not beg history to remember them. They simply live from such a high frequency of wealth consciousness that their essence carves its own place in time. They understand that true immortality is not in statues or plaques, it is in resonance. In how many lives changed because you dared to imagine boldly? In how many minds shifted because you embodied the wealth they could not yet see in themselves? At this level, decisions take on a sacred quality. Every yes is intentional. Every no is infused with clarity. The man no longer reacts to trends or fears. He consults his inner compass and moves as one who knows he is building something sacred. He is not rushed, for he knows eternity is with him. He is not swayed by short-term applause, for he hears the deeper sound of purpose. He speaks not to be heard, but to activate. He builds not to be praised, but to anchor something eternal into the temporary. This is the realm where your financial life becomes fully detached from survival. You are not building wealth to be free, you are building because you are free. And in that freedom, you no longer chase leverage, you offer legacy. You do not just create for customers, you create for culture. Every product, every piece of content, every interaction is a portal. It becomes a vehicle of consciousness. And though you may not see the final destination, you know your role is to begin the journey. The beauty of this level is that it does not require time. It requires vision. You do not need decades to create legacy. You need one moment of clarity, one powerful assumption, one unshakable identity, and from there, the rest unfolds. The man of legacy moves differently. He is quiet, but never unsure. He is firm, but never forceful. He is generous without condition, because he knows that everything he gives carries his essence, and essence, once planted, never dies. There is a kind of wealth that no man can measure. It cannot be taxed, stolen, or diminished. It is not stored in vaults, but in vibrations. And the man who lives at the legacy level understands this fully. He knows that long after the physical form is gone, his frequency will remain encoded in the lives he touched, the words he spoke, the energy he lived from. And that more than gold or silver is true wealth. Integration is the silent master of all transformation. To rise through the levels of wealth is not merely to climb, it is to become. And yet the final act is not to accumulate titles or to pass through doors. It is to realize that every level you moved through was not a destination, but a reflection, a mirror of your own state of consciousness. What you thought was a journey through outer wealth was always an unveiling of your inner self. When you reach the top, you do not look down, you look within, for you realize then, as you always should have, that all levels were inside you from the beginning. There is no true separation between survival, stability, comfort, growth, freedom, impact, and legacy. These are not rungs on a ladder, but states of being. You can touch legacy in the middle of survival if you dare to assume it. You can lose all form and still live in freedom if you assume differently. The man who has learned to integrate wealth levels does not wait for evidence. His life is no longer shaped by circumstance, but by conviction. He creates from the invisible, and the visible merely follows like a loyal servant. Integration means you no longer compartmentalize abundance. You no longer say, here I am free, but there I am stuck. Here I believe, but there I doubt. You become whole. You accept that the power which lifted you out of poverty is the same power that can write books, inspire nations, raise children, and transcend death. You stop asking new questions and begin living from the only answer that has ever mattered. I am. And when this awareness saturates your being, wealth becomes your natural language. This state cannot be taught with words alone. It must be practiced in silence. You must walk your days as if you are already the completed version of yourself, not pretending but knowing, not imitating but embodying. When you speak as one who already owns the field. When you move as one whose footsteps are guided by clarity. You stop asking for signs because you realize you are the sign. You do not seek validation because your existence validates your vision. The integrated soul is not perfect, but it is unified. It no longer fights with itself. It no longer chooses between spiritual and financial, between impact and rest, between joy and discipline. It knows that all these are one. It no longer postpones its highest expression, saying, when I get there, I will feel peace. No, it feels peace now. And because peace is assumed now, it becomes present everywhere. That is the law. What you assume to be true of yourself will harden into fact, whether in days, weeks, or moments. At this level, you cease to measure progress by numbers. You do not ask, how much did I earn? You ask, how aligned was I with who I am? You do not judge your work by outcomes, but by origins. Did I create this from fear or from fullness? Did I speak this because I had to, or because it was the natural overflow of being? You no longer seek momentum. You are momentum. You no longer chase energy. You generate it. The power of integration is in its calm. You are no longer moved by conditions. A drop in income does not threaten you. A delay in opportunity does not break you, because you are no longer relating to life as a beggar, but as a creator. You do not flinch when things go silent. You rest. You do not panic when others retreat. You stay. You know what you are, and because of that, you know what is coming. You do not hope. You declare. You do not negotiate with doubt. You dismiss it. In the integrated state, your past is not your enemy. It becomes your platform. You bless the survival. You appreciate the comfort. You laugh at the fear because all of it was useful. Every single moment of lack, hesitation, and resistance became the raw material for this awareness. You do not resent where you came from. You honor it. You do not deny what you once believed. You release it. And in doing so, you make space for something greater than belief, knowing. Integration is the end of striving, not the end of action, but the end of efforting. You no longer push your way through doors. You are the door. You no longer hustle to become worthy. You are already worthy. And from that assumption flows all activity. Whether you write, build, teach, lead, or simply rest, you do it from a center that does not shake. And that center produces outcomes with elegance, not strain. It creates with joy, not desperation. You become one who is trusted with wealth, not just financial wealth, but spiritual, emotional, generational. You are entrusted with vision because you do not betray it. You are entrusted with responsibility because you do not flinch. You are entrusted with opportunity because you do not shrink. And this is why the world gives more to you, not out of fairness, but out of alignment. It recognizes itself in you. It sees in you what it has longed to reflect. You are not here to collect wealth. You are here to become the frequency of it. And when you live from that frequency, you do not have to ask for what you desire. It appears. You do not plead for legacy. You are legacy. You do not wait for someone to change your reality. You assume your identity, and the reality bends to fit it. All levels of wealth begin and end in imagination. And the one who has integrated that truth no longer chases levels, it becomes the ladder itself. All that you have ever longed for already exists, not in the world, but in your own imagination. You were never poor, you only believed you were. You were never stuck, you only assumed you couldn't move. Every level of wealth you've explored, from survival to legacy, was simply a reflection of your self-concept at that moment. And the miracle is this: you can change that concept at any time. The ladder was never outside you, it was always within. And the moment you assume the highest level as your truth, the world reconfigures itself to match. This is not theory, it is law. You are the operant power, not by force, not by effort, but by assumption. If you dare to revise the story you tell about yourself, the world will mirror your revision. If you dare to walk as the one who is already free, wealthy, impactful, and eternal, life will rise to meet your walk. But you must walk first. You must imagine boldly. You must persist in the unseen until it hardens into fact. You are not a seeker. You are a creator. You are not chasing wealth. You are revealing it. And everything you desire already belongs to the version of you who dares to claim it inwardly. So ask yourself once more, not with fear, but with authority, which level are you stuck in, and are you ready to move? Because the world will never move first, but your imagination will. And that is where true wealth begins.